I knew that going into season 7, watching this again and seeing that this is the beginning of another like story arc, like the past 2 seasons, like season 4 was the first season that actually did have like an arc with the whole story of the Jerry show being progressed throughout season 4. When the arc, of course, was presented for season 7, because we had like, some, character development over seasons 5 and 6, but there wasn't like a season storyline, so to speak, for those 2 seasons. Season 7, which was the final full season for Larry David as executive producer, I didn't realize how much more aggressive the arc seemed to be. I mean, yes, there's a couple episodes in the first disc of season 7 where they kind of like don't really progress too much with the story arc, which of course is the story of George and Susan being engaged. But at the end of most of these episodes, you do kind of like, they kind of like set up the next episode at the end. It was different. So to me, it seemed the arc was a little bit more aggressive than it was whenever it was with the Jerry show story. So of course, was how did this story come about? Well, first off, the episode began as starting in season 7. They didn't have Jerry doing any like stand-ups at the beginning and ending of the shows. There were some endings in the previous season where Jerry wasn't doing stand-up, but in this one there wasn't any at the beginning now either. I know in season 8 they said they more veered away from that because with Jerry writing the show starting in season 8, it was kind of like one less thing he had to do. But here, not sure why they went with that. So the episode more so starts. George is at his apartment playing chess with some random woman he's on a date with, and basically she beat him in chess. George got offended and said, "I don't think we should see each other anymore." The next day, him and Jerry met up for lunch, and they were talking. Jerry was talking about how his girlfriend Melanie shushed him, so he broke it off with her. George was complaining about him losing the chess, and they were literally whining about little tiny petty things. And finally, Jerry just like covered his face and just went, ugh. So obviously, George can tell that that something, seemed like he has something on his mind. Finally, Jerry just says, and something that we never really saw any of the characters finally submit. They were just like, what are we doing? Like, basically, they start getting this discussion about how, like, they feel like they're just kids. They're not grown-ups. They're immature. They literally just, like, complain about the smallest little things, and, they're not doing anything about it, basically. It more so just implied to them, trying to, be serious, not be so petty when it comes to relationships and whatnot, more so because that was, of course, what led to, the story arc that started for the season 7. So basically they shake on saying that George talks about how one person he thinks about a lot is Susan from NBC, Susan Ross, which of course, the last time we saw her, she went lesbian, but it was more of a give and take thing, basically. George said he just ran into her recently, but he misses her. Which, of course, obviously leads to, the whole storyline arc, of course. The reason why they went with someone, of course, that we've already seen is that way there's, like, no introductions, no new character established. It's go with someone who we've already dealt with. And, of course, obviously, probably, even up to this point, the most serious and long-term we've seen George have was, obviously, with Susan. And of course, Jerry then says he's going to call Melanie again, and he doesn't care that he shushed her, and they shake on it. So George takes that one way, Jerry takes it another way. Jerry, of course, goes home, calls Melanie, schedules a second date. Just as Kramer walks in, and then Jerry starts talking to Kramer about the talk him and George had. Kramer then more so kind of talks Jerry out of it, saying how, like, marriage, family, it's like prisons. It's like, it's not about you anymore. It's all about them. He says how, like, you give her the morning, your wife, she's there. You come home at night, she's there. And basically, saying you got to do all this petty stuff. Basically, Kramer kind of, like, took all this momentum that Jerry had from that conversation with George and just shoved it all back in the garbage, basically. And completely threw off Jerry's plan. Because he did go out with Melanie for a second date, and he once again found something petty about her that he didn't like. As the first time, she shushed him. This time, she eats her peas one at a time, which drove Jerry nuts. It's over. George, meanwhile, he goes to the beach. The last time we saw George go to the beach, of course, was at the opposite episode, when he once again realized he needed to make some life changes. Which, of course, we went with, of course, the opposite, which got him the job with the Yankees, the apartment, and the only episode where everything seemed to work out for George. You can say so with this, but then again, was George fairly certain he was okay with what he was getting into, basically? So he sees all these other couples, and he starts thinking about, like, what him and Susan could be. And sure enough, he gets up, runs through the pigeons, runs to Susan's apartment, opens the door and flat out just says, "Will you marry me?" And then, of course, the next scene, they're on the phone with George's parents, who, out of the blue, I guess, must have gotten back together because, they had separated, in season 6, but now they're living together, seem to be back together and fine, so I guess during the off season, worked it out, who knows. But, I guess George, of course, later on said that, he basically, had to do some convincing. So just him saying, "Will you marry me?" was not enough. He had to do some convincing. And I like how, my favorite moment, of course, is whenever Mrs. Estelle Costanza asked to speak to Susan. And, "Congratulations." And Susan's like, "I just want you to know that I love your son very much." And Estelle's like, "Really?" And Susan's like, "Yeah." "Really? You really mean that?" "Yeah." It's like, Estelle seemed excited, and then Susan was like, "Yeah," like, whatever. Like, she wasn't like, "Yeah, I do." It's like, "Yeah." And then, of course, Estelle goes, "May I ask why?" She's like, "Really? Yeah. Yeah. Really? Yeah. May I ask why?" It's more so of like, why would anybody want to marry her son? Just like the reason I was talking with my mom, was like, what if I proposed to my girlfriend, basically? He goes, "Well, how would you know she would say yes?" And I said something like, "Who could say no to me?" And my mother flat out says, "Can you give me a few hours?" My mother. But I thought that was pretty funny. But of course, based off of that yelling, and then George, of course, goes back to Jerry's apartment to tell him that, they're engaged, and that he proposed to Susan. And he's all excited, riled up, but then Jerry says how he broke up with Melanie again. And that's where George starts squirming. He says throughout this entire season, he starts having second thoughts as Jerry's not going anywhere. Jerry already broke up with the girl that he was going to try to, not be so petty about. And now George is having second thoughts, as he did throughout the rest of the season. And of course, him and Jerry have been arguing constantly throughout the season, because saying that they had a pact. And Jerry's like, "What? You expect me just to get married, go off and propose to someone like you did?" He's like, "Well, not get married, but basically he wanted him to say he wanted to pick out a girl and say, 'I intend on marrying you.'" Basically, which is kind of rushing it, of course. But at least George and Susan, they have a history. Jerry and Melanie, one day shushed. And now, eating the peas one at a time. Then, of course, they argue about that. And then, like, throughout the rest of the episode, George, we get calls from Jerry saying he want to go to the movies, but Susan's there and she's got nothing to do. So now it's like the role of, like, I'm engaged to the fiance. I gotta put my fiance first. Can't be going out and playing with my friends every night. So we have a couple of those moments, like with the movies, and then whenever Jerry called George about the Yankee game, but, Susan was in bed. She taped a different show. And of course, at the end of the episode, like in the closing credits sequence, it's just like 30 seconds of George and Susan watching TV as Susan's all cuddling up with George. And George sitting there with this like painful expression on his face. He's like, what the hell have I got myself into? But meanwhile, the other story of this episode, though, of course, Elaine had just gotten a job with the J. Peterman catalog at the end of season 6, even though in the first 6 episodes we have not seen Peterman, which surprises me. And there's really only one somewhat mention of it is when we get to the hot tub episode, while Elaine's looking for John Paul, which we'll talk about that when we get there. But Elaine, I guess, also moved into a new apartment. I didn't realize that it was a different apartment, but there's this dog right in like the courtyard right outside her window that constantly barks and keeps Elaine up all night. Like the hoarse voice that Elaine had throughout this episode was literally when they pre-recorded the her screaming "shut up" at the dog from the window, and it got the hoarse voice. And Elaine, of course, has been getting no sleep because of this dog. Well, then Kramer basically said he knew someone that could, take the dog out. Which Elaine, even though she can't stand the dog, doesn't want to kill it, but, she wants to, just silence it. So he says he knows someone, which we later learn it's Newman that she's relying on. I just like how, Newman's all dramatic with the cigarette and whatnot, and Elaine says she'll think about it. So then they plan on maybe kidnapping the dog and taking it, somewhere, further, out into the country where it can't come back. So, finally, after Elaine, again, can't sleep because the dog constantly barking, she calls Newman and is like, okay, I'll do it. And Newman with a stare goes, excellent. Excellent. Which was pretty funny. So they run a truck, they grab rope and other stuff, and Kramer, Newman, and Elaine go to the courtyard. Newman kidnaps the dog, who looks a lot like Toto from The Wizard of Oz. They drive out to, I think it was Monticello in the country, drop off the dog, and drive back home, and Elaine's sleeping just fine, thinking everything's good. Well, the dog, no joke, makes its way all the way back from the country, back to the courtyard, and wakes up Elaine barking, saying it is not possible. And of course, they call the police, and I guess I forgot how it was, they were able to trace down Kramer. So then they traced down Kramer, and Elaine tried hiding. Now before this, though, this is, again, up until then, Elaine, though, was the only one who had not found out yet that George was engaged. So, of course, when Elaine went over to Jerry to, vent about how the dog came back, and Jerry tells Elaine just pushed her, going, get out! And shoves him, into Jerry's bedroom. Sets up for the storyline for the following episode, of course, which we'll get to that in the postponement, which is next. But, of course, as they're leaving the apartment, cops are outside Kramer's apartment talking to him about the dog, so Elaine tries to hide. Well, then, of course, Kramer rats out Newman, and when they go to Newman's apartment, which, of course, once again, inconsistency here, most of the time, Newman's apartment's been 5E, but it's been a couple episodes, such as in the last season, in the Doodle, whenever Jerry went to confront Newman about the chunky wrappers, realizing that it was Newman that gave him fleas, Newman's apartment there was 5F. So, inconsistencies. Is it 5E or 5F? Make up your mind! But anyways, so when Newman answered the door, all he said was, what took you so long? As if he knew it. And of course, before the last scene with George and Susan and watching TV in bed, the last scene is Newman, Elaine, and Kramer all in the backseat of a police car being taken in to be questioned about the dog. Elaine basically starts repeating the same things that was talked about in the beginning of the episode. Whenever Jerry says you gotta make some life changes, we're not an adult, we're kids basically, or whatever. And Elaine says the same exact thing as the episode ends. And that's the engagement. George is engaged, and he's already squirming. And he's already mad at Jerry because he thought they had a pact, but Jerry, of course, is now nowhere close to staying in that pact. Which I'm pretty sure Kramer kind of talked him out of it. But like I said, Elaine, we see that Elaine, says get out and shoves Jerry about George being engaged. Does that mean she's happy for him, or is she not happy for him? Which kind of sets up for a story for the next episode. I also do like in the blooper sequence, they do that scene where Elaine, at the end when Elaine says like, I'm not an adult, I'm a kid or whatnot. And Elaine goes, oh no. And then Kramer just goes, uh-oh, I foo-fooed. But, of course, getting back to the arc, of course, Andy Ackerman, of course, he wasn't around for when they did the Jerry Show storyline arc in season 4, so he wasn't sure how this was going to work. And they thought, as a lot of people think that whenever like a sitcom, goes with like a season arc, it's kind of like taking like a step back, they think it is. But it ended up working out pretty darn good. Now, the big question, of course, was, how is this going to end? Because, as they said, someone else coming into the 4 core characters' lives is going to kind of separate them out from each other. So Heidi Sweeberg said that she had heard rumors of that season 7 may have been the last season, so she thought maybe it was going to end with, George getting married. Which would have been a little bit odd, because again, George is not the centralized character in the episode. So having George kind of go out on top of everybody else would have been a little odd, I thought. Or, of course, they break up in some way. But then, of course, I guess they were talking. You each went out to eat after the tapings of the shows, or the airing of the shows, and they were just talking. I guess they're talking about the last scene with the painful expression on George's face, and they said something like, wouldn't you just want to kill her? And then Larry David goes, kind of like foreshadowing something yet to come. What is that, though? We will have to wait and see, though. As, like I said, this season is a story arc. And, like I said, it seems even more aggressive than it was from season 4. But there is some good episodes in season 7. I forget that's there, so should be a fun ride. But that's the season premiere, episode 1 of season 7 of Seinfeld, guys. What's your thoughts on the engagement? What are your thoughts also on this storyline arc as well? Do you think Susan was the right person for them to choose for this storyline going forward? Should have gone with somebody else? What do you guys think? Make sure to leave your thoughts down in the comments section below. And be sure, as always, to slap a like on the video, subscribe for more content on my channel, and follow me on Twitter as well, at DemandAirboy93. Till then, guys, I am checking out. I'll catch you all later. Have a great rest of your night. Peace out, everybody.